This video will detail how to work on stop with your foster puppy and how to fade out the use of a barrier. So to get started, I want to make sure that the foster puppy's leash is directly behind the back of their head. So if I use leash pressure, that pressure is coming from directly behind them. I approach my barrier, I say stop, and I reward my dog when he comes to a stop. He has to come to a stop because there's a barrier in his way. So you want to make sure to use something that the dog can't climb over or under or go easily around. We approach, I say stop. When he comes to a stop, I reward, and then we try again. And over time, what I'll do is I will move slightly to the right so that my dog is walking to the barrier, but I do not have a barrier in front of me. So I'm introducing the concept to my dog that when we walk together, I may walk a little bit farther after I ask you to stop. And so I'm not quite fading out the barrier yet for my dog, but this is how I'm going to start introducing that concept to him. And if my dog tries to come around the barrier with me, that's okay. I just need to do more practice walking straight up to the barrier with him. With every repetition, when I get a couple steps away from that barrier, I say stop, and then I take 2 more steps before coming to a halt. And every time my dog stops, I'm going to say yes and reward him. Next, you'll see working on the same exercise, but in a hallway. So we've got a longer approach, and it's important that you practice this exercise in multiple different locations so that the dog learns to generalize it. So I'm working with a chair in my hallway. If your foster puppy likes to go under a lot, then you'll need to use something else. We approach, we come to a stop together. I reward my dog when he comes to a stop. We walk back, we approach again. I say stop, we both come to a stop, and I reward my dog for coming to a stop. And notice that right now, he is in front of the barrier. He could try to dart around it. There is space for him to do that, but I've laid the foundation so that he does not try to go around the object. And so we're getting ready to come back down the hallway. I cue stop. I give him a reward for coming to a stop. And notice now that I am closer to the wall, so there is a little bit more space that my dog could attempt to squeeze through between me and the chair, but he doesn't. If he did, then I would go back to walking him directly up to the barrier and not giving him that space. He's starting to get the hang of this. And again, I want to reward every time. Foster puppies are young enough that you want to reward them very consistently because their brains are constantly developing and they won't reach a point where they know something well enough to do it without a reward while they are in your home. That reward can be a treat, it can be praise, it can be a toy, but that reward should happen. Now I'm moving the chair so that it is slightly out of the way. So there is a little bit more room now in the hallway for my dog to potentially push past that chair. We get set back up to come down the hallway again. You don't have to do this in a hallway. This is just the best spot in my home to do this. I say stop, he comes to a stop, and I reward him. I get set up for another repetition. Dogs learn best with consistent repetition, so practicing it the same way each time and practicing in different environments. We approach, I say stop, my dog comes to a stop, and I reward him. I'm going to move the chair just a little bit into the doorway now so that it's slightly more out of the way. There's now more room in the hallway for the dog to go around. I get set back up. And again, you want to practice this in multiple different locations with different barriers, but you may need to start over each time in a new location. We approach, I say stop, he comes to a stop, and I reward. By starting back over, I mean that you do a couple repetitions of walking into the barrier before fading it out. Once the dog knows this exercise well, you should be able to fade the barrier out more quickly and eventually not need a barrier at all. We approach, I say stop, he comes to a stop, and I reward. I ask my dog to sit and stay so that I can move the chair. Now we've got even more space in the hallway, so this is how I am fading out the barrier. Eventually the barrier will be completely out of sight, and my dog will rely on the verbal cue alone, but that takes a lot of repetition and a lot of practice. Walking down the hallway, I ask my dog to stop. He comes to a stop and I reward him, but he is cueing off of that chair being in sight. So I don't want to get rid of it completely, or else he's going to be confused and he won't be successful. So I'm gradually removing that chair until eventually I don't need it there at all. Coming up, I'm going to give my dog a little bit of a test to see how well he's learning this. So we stop at the chair. That's not the test. I go back and set up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask him to stop sooner than I had previously to see how well he responds to the verbal command. I ask him to stop, and he walked a couple steps ahead of me that time, but he did come to a stop. So what that lets me know is that he is learning the word, but his response time was a little bit slower because it was in a new place in the hallway, and that visual cue of the chair wasn't there that time. And so again, if I were to use leash pressure, I want to make sure that my dog's leash is coming from directly behind the back of his head, though I didn't use leash pressure at all in this video.